There are two aspects of the yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother that become especially apparent on Darshan Day, I think. One is the vast, 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 vast unlimitedness of the divine. The divine means this vast, the V, which appears in Sri Aurobindo's writing frequently. And another epithet that occurs frequently is the infinite. The infinite. It's not a mathematical series. It's a qualitative being. And when we get a glimpse of that vast, infinite divine, then we know, whether we know it or not, where everything comes from. Everything is there. There is no time there. And so when we tune into that, we feel what the Mother refers to as the universal rhythm. And everything that happens in accordance with that universal rhythm. So this sutra that we're hearing about udasinata, this seated above in ourselves, being seated above in ourselves. So this is the other side of that vast, this intimate, warm, inner connection with that vast, universal rhythm. And when we really make that connection, then we've achieved what this sutra is talking about, this samata. Everything is that universal rhythm. And then we don't pay any attention to difference and judgment and preference and suffering and pleasure. It's just that. So this is a Yoga Siddhi, a perfection, a psychological perfection in yoga. To be always aware of that vast, from this inner center, and then all of our normal reactions and responses and perversions and stupidities that we associate with so proudly disappear. But that's tough. That's a tough separation. So darshan gives us a little glimpse into a possibility. But it's a seed, like the mantra is a seed, and we get glimpses. But to practice this as a permanent way of living is what yoga means. So I'd like to continue a little bit the sutra on Samata. Samata Shanti Sukham Hasyam Iti Shanti Chatusthayam. So Sri Aurobindo says, the yogin comes to change all the ordinary values of experience. No experiences will have the same value anymore when one achieves this samatha. So bye-bye preferences, habits of good and what's good and what's bad, and what you like and what you don't like. It's all that. Amangala reveals itself to him as Mangala. Amangala means ill fortune. Well, welcome to ill fortune. Why not? It's better than you thought, or felt, or believed. Defeat. Welcome. And ill success. These are changed into the fulfillment of God's immediate purpose and a step towards ultimate victory. You like that idea? Grief and pain are concealed and perverse forms of pleasure. A stage arrives even when physical pain itself, the hardest thing for material man to bear, changes its nature in experience and becomes physical Ananda. You can have a good toothache. I've had them, and they're fine. And the mother used to have these problems with her teeth too, and she would sometimes talk about it, but sometimes we could also hear it. But this physical Ananda is only at the end, when this human being, imprisoned in matter, subjected to mind, emerges from his subjection, conquers his mind, and delivers himself utterly in his body, releasing his true Anandamaya self in every part of the Adhara. So this is the passive samatha, the reception of every kind of experience equally. This is not equanimity. Everything is the same, divine vibration. When you can no longer experience pain. So that's a transformation of human nature. Then there's the active samatha. Sama Ananda in all experiences. Not only do you receive them without reacting to them, but you experience the delight of the divine in them. Rasaha, Pritir Ananda Iti Sarvananda. Everything is delight. This is the truth. Everything else is illusion. That's why it's possible. Rasa is the appreciative perception of that guna, whatever guna it is. that aswada, taste and quality, whatever the taste and quality, which the Ishvara of the Leela perceives in each different object of experience, and for the enjoyment of which he creates it in the Leela. So this divine has got some weird tastes. In fact, some of them are pretty despicable from a certain point of view. But we can get over that. So, pritya is the pleasure of the mind in all rasa. All tastes are good. So drink that dandelion tea.
Except for licorice.
Pleasant or unpleasant, sweet or bitter, Ananda is the divine boga. Boga, enjoyment. Pritya, ecstasy. It's not just good, it's divine. The divine boga is superior to all mental pleasure with which God enjoys the rasa. In Ananda, the opposition of the dualities entirely ceases. I think Ken Wilber called that one taste. I wonder if he had any idea what he was talking about. So, Shanti can be perfect only when Samata is accomplished. You won't have peace until you get this realization that everything tastes divine. Then you don't have to worry, get nervous, run away, hide. You're just peaceful. So that's that intimacy inside with the vast. We feel it. It's not an idea. And later on, we'll study a little bit how it is that our senses are not really our senses. Our senses are God's divine incarnations. They are not the product of animal evolution. They are universal principles of seeing, hearing, tasting, feeling, and everything in existence has these experiences. Matter is not the foundation of existence. And organs that evolve are evolving material forms of these things which exist universally, like sight and hearing. So it's all, backwards in our understanding. So Sukham is the complete relief and release from dukkha, from vishada, from sorrow and despondency. Complete release, which comes by the fulfillment of samatha and shanti, Sukham. The perfected yogin has never in himself any touch of sorrow, any tendency of depression, cloud, or internal repining and weariness, but is always full of sattvic light and ease. Hasya, Sukham Hasyam. Hasyam is the active side of Sukham. It consists in an active internal state of gladness and cheerfulness which no adverse experience, mental or physical, can trouble. That doesn't say that there is no adverse experience. It says that no adverse experience can trouble this gladness and sweetness and calm. So this is an internal yogic consciousness. We're not transforming the world here. All of these things still exist, that exist now. There are still imperfections everywhere, and struggle, and strife, and friction. And especially among humans who consist of a very large spectrum of levels of development and consciousness and behavior. We can't expect any of that to really change. Well, we will hear something about how we can change to such an extent that it helps others to experience the unchanging. Because if we don't react to anything, if all we do is irradiate Sukham and Hasyam, then we won't be reinforcing other people's inferior behavior so much as we normally do. And in some distant future, the norm may become harmony. But there will still be a lot of nonsense. So I'm going to move to something that the mother said about that, which is in your packet. I'm not going to read all of this, but I want to touch on at least the first page of it. This is 1965, and I have another one from 1970 that's similar. But there is an insight here that is relevant to our mission, our prospects. Did you feel anything special on the darshan day? She asked Satprem. No? Well, Satprem is one of these very reserved people, so even if he felt something, he probably wouldn't say it. Sri Aurobindo was there from morning to evening. There, For, more than an hour, he made me live the concrete and living vision, as it were, of the condition of humanity. And the various layers of humanity in relation to the new or supramental creation. And it was marvelously clear and concrete and living. There was the whole humanity that isn't quite animal anymore, that has benefited from mental development and created a certain harmony in its life, a vital, artistic, literary harmony. And you might notice that this is still not the majority. She's talking about a kind of elite European community here. It's not great, but it's better than Walmart. And sometimes it's even great.
Do you think there's been some devolution since you said that? Because
since she said that. No, I think she was just being generous.
It seems like it's still very, very animal.
She's looking, like I said, she's talking to Satprem, and she has around her a few hundred of the cream of the European and Indian population, and she's been working with these groups for 40 years, intimately. And so she certainly knows all the other levels very well. She said to the Aurovillians, this is not a supra-rational community, this is an infra-rational community. So the people who were coming for Auroville weren't measuring up, and still don't. But that's another subject altogether. We'll see why now, we'll see why. Okay, it's okay, all of that's okay. This is the nice thing about it. So she's being nice here. The vast majority of which live satisfied with life. They have caught a sort of harmony and live in it a life as it exists in a civilized milieu. That is to say, somewhat cultured, with refinement in taste, refinement in habits. And this whole life has a sort of harmony in which they find themselves at ease. until the handle on the toilet breaks. Or any number of other possible disturbances. I mean, at least in this country, most things work. Or you can fix them fairly easily. And unless something catastrophic happens to them, they live happy and content, satisfied with life. Those may be attracted because they have taste, they are intellectually developed. They may be attracted to the new forces, the new things, the future life. For instance, they may mentally, intellectually become disciples of Sri Aurobindo. But they don't at all feel the need to change materially. And if they were to be forced to, it would be, first of all, premature and unjust. And it would quite simply create a great disorder and would upset their lives quite unnecessarily. It was very clear. Then there were the few, the rare individuals who are ready to make the necessary effort to prepare themselves for the transformation. And to attract the new forces, try to adapt matter, seek the means of expression, and so forth. Those are ready for Sri Aurobindo's yoga. They are very few. There are even those who have the sense of sacrifice and are ready to have a hard and difficult life as long as it leads them or helps them towards this future transformation. But they should not. They should in no way try to influence others and make them share their own effort. That would be quite unjust. Not only unjust, but extremely clumsy, because it would alter the universal, or at least terrestrial, rhythm and movement. And instead of helping, it would cause conflicts and result in chaos. But it was so living, so real, that my whole attitude, how can I explain, a passive attitude which isn't the result of an active will, the whole position taken in the work has changed. And this has brought a peace. An absolutely decisive peace and tranquility and trust. A decisive change. And even all that in the previous position seemed to be obstinacy, clumsiness, unconsciousness, all sorts of deplorable things, all that has disappeared. It was like a vision of a great universal rhythm in which each thing takes its own place and everything is just fine. So she's 90 years old, practicing yoga with Sri Aurobindo, and she just now got to this point. Which we were just hearing about from the sutra. And the effort of transformation, limited to a small number, becomes something far more precious and far more powerful for the realization. It's as if a choice had been made of those who will be the pioneers of the new creation. And all those ideas of spreading the ideal, of preparing or churning matter, childishness. It's human agitation. The vision had such majestic and calm and smiling beauty. Oh, it was full, really full of divine love. And not a divine love that forgives. That's not at all the point. Not at all. Each thing in its own place. Realizing its inner rhythm as perfectly as it can. That's all. That was a very beautiful gift. And you might remember some lines in Savitri in which it says, this is a description of Savitri in Book 7 when she has realized equality, perfect samatha, in Canto 6, and then these lines come in Canto 7. Accustomed only to read outward signs, none saw aught new in her. None divined her state. They saw a person where was only God's vast, a still being, and a mighty nothingness. So this perfect indifference, this samatha, has two sides. And we will be hearing a lot about this week, because this is really important for us to know. This Brahmananda realization is, first of all, a realization of the emptiness, the vast itself in all. And that vast in all is unchanging. And so it's a negation. It's a negation of the pleasure and a negation of the pain and a negation of the differences. Even at the very moment when the differences are known, it's a negation of the differences that are known, because it's an affirmation of that one being. And so we hear many references to the one. And the whole of Canto 6 is about her identification with that one, and everything else to her just seems to be sort of automatic happening. But she is totally immersed in the one, which is everywhere and which is unchanging. So when we pass into that kind of a consciousness, that is literally an alteration of our nervous system to the extent that it can't perceive difference in a very real way. And so there tends to develop in yogic philosophy these vast schools, both Hindu and Buddhist, which claim that empty one is reality and all the rest is illusion. And it's true. Until there's the next realization. And so Sri Aurobindo speaks about the two liberations. And this one is necessary. But beyond it, he says, there is a second liberation, which we'll be hearing about also, and only he can tell us about that. So in Savitri, what I will be focusing on this week is 9 cantos in which he juxtaposes these two liberations. And I would say that this is probably the single most important theme in Savitri. It's the preparation for death also. This whole practice is a preparation for death. To not be attached to life is step 1. Step 2 is to be burning with the divine will to reincarnate throughout time its possibilities. All of them. But as long as we don't, first of all, detach ourselves from the present possibilities that we're so familiar with, we can't tune into that will to go beyond them to other possibilities. So in this, I'm going to read 2 cantos. They're very short. And in one of them, we will hear this perfect description of Samata, and especially Udasina. Before that, though, I wanted to read a section from the synthesis, because I'm trying to point out here how the Sapta Chatusthaya gets elaborated in the synthesis. And so there's this one paragraph, or 1.5 paragraphs, that we read recently in the study group, that shows how how close the synthesis runs on this Sapta Chatusthaya track. He writes, "There is a period of high-seated impartiality and indifference in which the soul becomes free from exaltation and depression, and escapes from the snare of the eagerness of joy as from the dark net of the pangs of grief and suffering. All things and persons and forces, all thoughts and feelings and sensations and actions, one's own no less than those of others, are regarded from above by a spirit that remains intact and immutable and is not disturbed by these things. This is the philosophic period of the preparation of equality, a wide and august movement. But indifference must not settle into an inert turning away from action and experience. It must not be an aversion born of weariness, disgust, and distaste." Welcome. It must not be, we're speaking about udasina here, seated above. It must not be a recoil of disappointed or satiated desire, the sullenness of a baffled and dissatisfied egoism, forced back from its passionate aims. These recoils come inevitably in the unripe soul and may in some way help the progress by a discouragement of the eager, desire-driven, vital nature, but they are not the perfection towards which we labor. The indifference or the impartiality that we must seek is a calm superiority of the high-seated soul above the contacts of things. Udasina. It regards and accepts or rejects them. It regards and accepts or rejects them, but is not moved in the rejection and is not subjected by the acceptance. So this is a very interesting and important distinction. It is a movement of nature in us to accept or reject the things that we experience. But it is a movement of something in us which is not nature, which doesn't react to either the rejection or the acceptance. It's another part of us which is seated above. It begins to feel itself near, kin to, one with a silent self and spirit, self-existent and separate from the workings of nature. Self-existent and separate from the workings of nature. The self is not nature. It is not prakriti. It is purusha. And it is unchanging. So all this business of yoga and samatha is about separating that from all the rest. Just like always in Raja Yoga. Separating Purusha, liberating Purusha from Prakriti. we don't even know what that is. Because we're totally stuck in Prakriti, and we think that our ego is ourself, and all the things we like and don't like are real and important. And so we live in the human nature of consciousness. But the yogin doesn't. Consciousness, by the way, is nature. And the highest consciousness is known as para-prakriti. But the self is not that. It is param purusha. And it is unchanging. Self. Now, there are schools of yoga in which consciousness, always has an object. According to my studies, consciousness always has an object. So if consciousness is conscious of the self, then it appears that to some schools of yoga, that this consciousness of the self is the ultimate thing. And it's consciousness of consciousness, the consciousness of itself. So when consciousness becomes conscious of just itself and has no other object, then the Buddhistic schools call that mindfulness. But that which has the possibility of manifesting mindfulness is not mindfulness. It is the self. So this is an extremely fine and important distinction that entails a liberation even from mindfulness. But this is not a distinction that those who are very interested in mindfulness need to make, because they realize the consciousness of the self. And so they realize this first liberation of Purusha from Prakriti. And it appears to be consciousness of consciousness, which is emptiness. And that's a liberation, and a very necessary one. And fortunately, it's very popular these days. So you can go to plenty of workshops on mindfulness and practice the first liberation. So then Sri Aurobindo says,
I was just thinking that what Mother said about the people who have a more refined intellect, a more refined taste, in some sense perhaps there are more of those because of this mindfulness.
Or maybe there's more mindfulness because of them.
Yeah.
Because evolutionarily that population is increasing. So it's one or the other, or both. So this paragraph ends like this. It begins to feel itself near, kin, one with a silent self and spirit, self-existent and separate from the workings of nature, which it supports and makes possible. It begins to feel itself part of or merged in the motionless, calm reality that transcends the motion and action of the universe. So the Brahman in the Upanishads, in the Isha Upanishad, that Brahman is in this, and that Brahman is also outside this. So the first realization is the realization of the Saguna Brahman. The Nirguna Brahman is outside all this. So then it can be aware that all of this is just that, in its temporal, incremental, good, bad, different possibilities. But this is a very exalted state. The gain of this period of high transcendence is the soul's peace, unrocked and unshaken by the pleasant ripplings or by the tempestuous waves and billows of the world's movement. If we can pass through these two stages of the inner change without being arrested or fixed in either, we are admitted to a greater divine equality which is capable of a spiritual ardor and tranquil passion of delight, a rapturous, all-understanding and all-possessing equality of the perfected soul, an intense and even wideness and fullness of its being, embracing all things. This is the supreme period, and the passage to it is through the joy of a total self-giving to the divine and to the universal mother. So this is the Shakti part. Beyond the sutra and mantra, there's the tantric energizing of the divine force in oneself and in nature. The transformation of Prakriti, that's the second liberation. It's not a negative liberation. It's the liberation of the energy field in its creativity, in its dynamism, but not from the individual point of view, from the universal rhythm. The universal rhythm becomes the individual rhythm, the particular rhythm, the rhythm of everything. But first we have to be able to perceive it as the universal rhythm. And that requires absolute detachment and seeing the one in all. The next one is being the one in all. So even in Savitri, this doesn't happen very, very frequently. I mean, it's not spoken about very much, but it is spoken about. So we will hear some cantos this week which turn exactly on this wheel. The first liberation and the second liberation. The liberation of Samata and the liberation of the descent of the divine Shakti. We have to have this one in order to be open to that one. Now, as we know from the ashram and Auroville and sitting in the dome, it's pretty easy to get an intimation of that one. It comes down. We feel the vibe. But it doesn't necessarily change anything inside or outside. There has to be that will to use it, to allow it to change the way we are as humans. It wants to do that. It exists for that. But we don't want it to do that because we're happy with our harmonic compromises. So we want to just be good humans. We don't want to be yogins and transformed divine instruments. That's too much trouble. Right?
No.
Well, let's be honest with ourselves.
Why would we
This is a lesson in self-assessment. I don't expect anyone to be able to say very much about this. We probably are even hardly aware of what it means. So it's not necessary to commit oneself to others. But anyway, nobody else is going to know the difference. So there aren't going to be any rewards from this sacrifice and suffering and detachment from all the normal patterns of behavior, except that that detachment is its own reward, and it's the divine. But no one else will know the difference, so don't worry. Whether you do it or not doesn't matter. So, like I said, I'm going to read 2 short cantos that turn around these issues. And this is the mantra. So we are exploring sutra, mantra, and tantra. And if we sit quietly for a while after this canto, we should be moving into the 3rd range. Before I read this canto, I'm going to read a few lines that we'll hear separately. I mean, I'd like you to hear them separately, and then we'll hear them as part of the whole. He stood on a wide arc of summit space, alone with an enormous self of mind, which held all life in a corner of its vasts. Omnipotent, immobile, and aloof. In the world which sprang from it, it took no part. It gave no heed to the paeans of victory. It was indifferent to its own defeats. It heard the cry of grief and made no sign. Impartial fell its gaze on evil and good. it saw destruction come and did not move. So this is the, we've heard it now in Sutra, in Synthesis of Yoga, and it's the same thing here. Again. But this one is the mantric version. At last there came a bare, indifferent sky, where silence listened to the cosmic voice, but answered nothing to a million calls. The soul's endless question met with no response. An abrupt conclusion ended eager hopes. A deep cessation in a mighty calm. A deep cessation in a mighty calm. A finny line on the last page of thought, and a margin and a blank of wordless peace. There paused the climbing hierarchy of worlds. He stood on a wide arc of summit space, alone with an enormous self of mind, which held all life in a corner of its vasts, omnipotent, immobile, and aloof. In the world which sprang from it, it took no part. It gave no heed to the paeans of victory. It was indifferent to its own defeats. It heard the cry of grief and made no sign. Impartial fell its gaze on evil and good. It saw destruction come and did not move. An equal cause of things, a lonely seer, and master of its multitude of forms, it acted not, but bore all thoughts and deeds, the witness, Lord of nature's myriad acts, consenting to the movements of her force. His mind reflected this vast quietism, this witness hush is the thinker's secret base. I would like to revert to a teaching from the Upanishads that we heard at the end of last year. The thinker, with a capital T, is called Manishi. And there are three principles of the creative Purusha in existence, and we all participate in them. there's the Kavi, who is the seer of all relations and all causes and all effects, and he is the Vijnana Maya Purusha, the Kavi. The Manishi, the thinker, is all the thought that happens in time and space as an anticipation of planning, evaluation, knowing, the principle of knowing in time and space, is a level of that consciousness of the Kavi, who is the seer of all. But the seer of all knows things in bits and pieces and systems and processes. And the third level is the Virat. Virat is the principle of acting according to what is thought and known. So all consciousness at all levels of creation in the universe has these three levels. It is universal, direct seeing of the whole, universal thinking out in terms of process, universal will to do the things that are done in fields of energy and expression. Kavi, Manishi, Virat. And just before Savitri reincarnates at the end of the everlasting day, she sees these three as her guides for the new creation. It is seen above, it is knowable below, and it can be done. This witness hush is the thinker's secret base. Hidden in silent depths, the word is formed. From hidden silences, the act is born. Into the voiceful mind, the laboring world. So this pattern of Kavi, Manishi, Virat is Sri Aurobindo's common view. He articulates it constantly. This witness hush is the thinker's secret base. Hidden in silent depths, the word is formed. From hidden silences, the act is born. Into the voiceful mind, the laboring world. In secrecy wraps the seed, the eternal sows silence. The mystic birthplace of the soul. In God's supreme, withdrawn, and timeless hush, a seeing self and potent energy met. The silence knew itself, and thought took form. Self-made from the dual power creation rose. In the still self he lived, and it in him. Its mute, immemorable, listening depths, its vastness and its stillness were his own. One being with it, he grew wide, powerful, free. Apart, unbound, he looked on all things done, as one who builds his own imagined scenes and loses not himself in what he sees. Spectator of a drama self-conceived, he looked on the world and watched its motive thoughts with the burden of luminous prophecy in their eyes. Its forces, with their feet of wind and fire, arisen from the dumbness in his soul. All now he seemed to understand and know. Desire came not, nor any gust of will. The great, perturbed inquirer lost his task. Nothing was asked, nor wanted anymore. There he could stay. The self, the silence, one. His soul had peace. It knew the cosmic whole. Then suddenly a luminous finger fell on all things seen, or touched, or heard, or felt, and showed his mind that nothing could be known. That must be reached, from which all knowledge comes. The skeptic ray disrupted all that seems, and smote at the very roots of thought and sense. In a universe of nescience they have grown, aspiring towards a superconscious sun, playing in shine and rain from heavenlier skies. They never can win, however high their reach, or overpass, however keen their probe. A doubt corroded even the means to think. Distrust was thrown upon mind's instruments. All that it takes for reality's shining coin, proved fact, fixed inference, deduction clear, firm theory, assured significance, appeared as frauds upon time's credit bank, or assets valueless in truth's treasury, and ignorance on an uneasy throne, travestied with a fortuitous sovereignty, a figure of knowledge, garbed in dubious words and tinsel thought forms, brightly inadequate. A laborer in the dark, dazzled by half-light, What it knew was an image in a broken glass. What it saw was real, but its sight untrue. All the ideas in its vast repertory were like the mutterings of a transient cloud that spent itself in sound and left no trace. A frail house hanging in uncertain air, the thin, ingenious web round which it moves, put out a while on the tree of the universe, and gathered up into itself again, was only a trap to catch life's insect food. Winged thoughts that flutter, fragile in brief light, but dead, once captured in fixed forms of mind. Aims puny, but looming large in man's small scale. Flickers of imagination's brilliant gauze and cobweb-wrapped beliefs, alive no more. The magic hut of built-up certitudes made out of glittering dust and bright moonshine, in which it shrines its image of the real, collapsed into the nescience whence it rose. Only a gleam was there of symbol facts that shroud the mystery lurking in their glow, and falsehoods based on hidden realities by which they live until they fall from time. Our mind is a house haunted by the slain past. Ideas soon mummified. Ghosts of old truths, God's spontaneities tied with formal strings and packed into drawers of reason's trim bureau. A grave of great lost opportunities. Or an office for misuse of soul and life, and all the waste man makes of heaven's gifts, and all his squanderings of nature's store, a stage for the comedy of ignorance. The world seemed a long aeonic failure's scene. All sterile grew. No base was left secure. Assailed by the edge of the convicting beam, the builder reason lost her confidence in the successful sleight and turn of thought that makes the soul the prisoner of a phrase. Its highest wisdom was a brilliant guess. Its mighty structured science of the worlds a passing light on being's surfaces. There was nothing there but a schema drawn by sense, a substitute for eternal mysteries, a scrawl figure of reality, a plan and elevation by the architect word imposed upon the semblances of time. Existence's self was shadowed by a doubt. Almost it seemed a lotus leaf afloat on a nude pool of cosmic nothingness. This great spectator and creator mind was only some half-seeing's delegate, a veil that hung between the soul and light, an idol, not the living body of God, even the still spirit that looks upon its works was some pale front of the unknowable. A shadow seemed the wide and witness self. Its liberation and immobile calm, a void recoil of being from time-made things. Not the self-vision of eternity. Deep peace was there, but not the nameless force. Our sweet and mighty Mother was not there, who gathers to her bosom her children's lives, her clasp that takes the world into her arms, in the fathomless rapture of the infinite. The bliss that is creation's splendid grain, or the white passion of God ecstasy that laughs in the blaze of the boundless heart of love. A greater spirit than the self of mind must answer to the questioning of his soul. For here was no firm clue and no sure road. High climbing pathways ceased in the unknown. An artist's sight constructed the beyond in contrary patterns and conflicting hues. A part experience fragmented the whole. He looked above, but all was blank and still. A sapphire firmament of abstract thought escaped into a formless vacancy. He looked below, but all was dark and mute. A noise was heard between, of thought and prayer, a strife, a labor without end or pause. A vain and ignorant seeking raised its voice. A rumor and a movement and a call. A foaming mass, a cry innumerable, rolled ever upon the ocean surge of life, along the coasts of mortal ignorance. On its unstable and enormous breast, beings and forces, forms, ideas like waves, jostled for figure and supremacy, and rose and sank, and rose again in time. And at the bottom of the sleepless stir, a nothingness, parent of the struggling worlds. A huge creator, death. A mystic void. forever sustaining the irrational cry, forever excluding the supernal word, motionless, refusing question and response, reposed beneath the voices and the march, the dim inconscience, dumb incertitude. Two firmaments of darkness and of light opposed their limits to the Spirit's walk. It moved veiled in from self's infinity in a world of beings and momentary events where all must die to live and live to die. Immortal by renewed mortality, it wandered in the spiral of its acts or ran around the cycles of its thought, yet was no more than its original self, and knew no more than when it first began. To be was a prison, extinction the escape. A covert answer to his seeking came. In a far shimmering background of mind space, a glowing mouth was seen. A luminous shaft. A recluse gate, it seemed, musing on joy. A veiled retreat and escape to mystery. Away from the unsatisfied surface world, it fled into the bosom of the unknown. A well, a tunnel of the depths of God. It plunged as if a mystic groove of hope through many layers of formless, voiceless self, to reach the last profound of the world's heart. And from that heart there surged a wordless call, pleading with some still impenetrable mind, voicing some passionate, unseen desire. As if a beckoning finger of secrecy outstretched into a crystal mood of air, pointing at him from some near hidden depth. As if a message from the world's deep soul. an intimation of a lurking joy that flowed out from a cup of brooding bliss. There shimmered, stealing out into the mind, a mute and quivering ecstasy of light, a passion and delicacy of roseate fire. As one drawn to his lost spiritual home, feels now the closeness of a waiting love, into a passage dim and tremulous that clasped him in from day and night's pursuit. He traveled, led by a mysterious sound, a murmur multitudinous and lone. All sounds it was in turn, yet still the same. A hidden call to unforeseen delight. In the summoning voice of one long known, well loved, but nameless to the unremembering mind. It led to rapture back the truant heart. The immortal cry ravished the captive ear. Then, lowering its imperious mystery, it sank to a whisper circling round the soul. It seemed the yearning of a lonely flute that roamed along the shores of memory and filled the eyes with tears of longing joy. A cricket's rash and fiery single note. It marked with shrill melody night's moonless hush and beat upon a nerve of mystic sleep. Its high, insistent, magical revive. A jingling silver laugh of anklet bells traveled the roads of a solitary heart. Its dance solaced an eternal loneliness. An old forgotten sweetness sobbing came. Or from a far harmonious distance heard the tinkling pace of a long caravan, it seemed at times, or a vast forest's hymn, the solemn reminder of a temple gong. A bee croon, honey drunk in summer isles, ardent with ecstasy in a slumberous noon, or the far anthem of a pilgrim sea. An incense floated in the quivering air, a mystic happiness trembled in the breast, as if the invisible beloved had come, assuming the sudden loveliness of a face, and close, glad hands could seize his fugitive feet. And the world change with the beauty of a smile. Into a wonderful bodiless realm he came, the home of a passion without name or voice, a depth he felt, answering to every height. A nook was found that could embrace all worlds. A point that was the conscious knot of space. An hour eternal in the heart of time.